Welcome back. You're with us here on Bazaar Morning Call. This is, of course, our special segment, Trump Watch. A lot of uncertainty around tariffs and markets remain on tenterhook. To dive deeper on the tariff issue, I'm now joined by the one and only Neelkant Mishra, Chief Economist at Axis Bank, Head of Global Market Research at Axis Capital, and one who sort of, in his own way, marries the macro and the micro. His opinion is widely sought after. Neelkant, thank you very much. Good to have you here. Simple question, but not so simple answer. As we go into the 2nd of April, they've said that they will hand over all countries a number, a reciprocal tariff number. In your opinion, what will that number be for India?
It is wise to even surmise that. As we think about the economy and the markets, I think it's very important to see this as one of many important milestones because this will just be a starting point. It is very important to understand what is it that the Trump administration is trying to achieve. As we see it, underneath the somewhat chaotic announcements of tariffs today and no tariffs tomorrow and then tariffs the third day, there are three broad objectives that the U.S. is trying to achieve, the current administration. The first is that they are no longer willing to bear the costs of multilateralism. So we are moving from multilateralism to bilateralism. That will have its own repercussions, and we can discuss that. The second is that they realize that being the reserve currency of the world has meant that they've had to sustain a current account deficit. The currency is overvalued, and they want to do something about it. I don't think they're 100% clear on exactly what needs to be done, but they want to address the problem. And the third is that most people in the current administration want to go back to the glory days of pre-World War II isolationist America, where they focused on their own strengths and they benefited from it. And also remember that between 1866 and 1913, 50% of federal revenues came from import tariffs. So they want to use imports. It's almost as if that, this is a great pool of American consumption. If you want to dip into it, you have to pay a tax. And there are assumption estimates that, if they can generate $300 billion a year from import tariffs, they can offset some of the personal income taxes. So remember that while personal income tax was introduced during the Civil War, it was only around the First World War, like 1% tax in 1914-15. That personal income tax really started to become big. So I don't think they can replace all of personal income tax because all of customs duties was just $80 billion a year for the US. But they do want to increase this substantially. These are the three broad objectives. And over the next year or two, you will see them moving and pushing in that direction. And I think we have to anticipate that. So what that number is on April 2, frankly, will matter a lot less. But I think these changes are what we have to get used to.
But humor me, Neelkant, could it be 9% just mathematically to begin with? Because you said that's right on. Will it be 9, 10? Those are numbers I've heard. And do you think they will include VAT? Because then the number jumps significantly.
See, this is why there is a negotiation, right? So I think it is wrong to because while there is a unilateral desire to have a certain level, but I think most of bilateral agreements are about give and take, about benefits, and not all benefits. So I think it is very clear from the US government's messaging that they would like to include VAT in it. But frankly, I'm not privy to the discussions, and I don't think whatever happens on 2nd April will be the final one. My sense is that it will be that there will be some announcements there, and there could be some changes that would come in with a much later due date.
What you're suggesting, though, is that this is the starting, and then there are more things coming. Those three objectives that you lined up.
Yes. So,
Many in the, and I'm now linking it to the market, many in the market are of the view that this is a hump to get over, and then from there things will get easier. You are suggesting otherwise. Have I read that rightly?
yes, absolutely. See, remember that we are reshaping the world order. The post Second World War world order is now being reshaped. And remember that tariffs are only one form of industrial policy. You have many other forms of industrial policy, which are not possible today because people are worried about the World Trade Organization. Now, suppose export subsidy. Export subsidies are not allowed, so companies and countries don't. Most countries don't have them, at least not explicitly. Now, imagine that you are only having bilateral relationships now, and if one country starts to subsidize their exports of a certain product, so long as it doesn't affect the U.S., they're not going to be bothered about it, and the countries will start working on these themes. In fact, everyone now seems to be familiar with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930. But you must have noticed that 2 years after that, Japan and Britain broke the gold standard. After that, the US broke the gold standard, and France was the last to break it. And if you plot the industrial production in these countries over the decade of the 1930s, the countries that broke the gold standard first, and therefore their currencies depreciated the most, were the biggest beneficiaries. Now, whether there is causality in that or not, meaning that was it just because they weakened the currency or were there other factors? I'm sure there are other factors. But this will be very tempting. So very soon, because see, this is, as countries grapple with the pace of change. So suppose it's China. Now, you have 20% tariffs already. On top of that, because you're buying oil from Venezuela, suppose it becomes 45%. What happens to Chinese goods? And as the negotiations happen, the U.S. buyers are trying to push down prices, or that you take some of the hit. Now, some of it they will try to displace into other countries. They will start raising the barriers. So we are going to see a lot of chaos, a lot of uncertainty, and imagine being a country planning your supply chains in this process. It is going to be very difficult.
Absolutely. And we were just discussing this very same thing, Neelkant, with Mr. Baba Kalyani a while back, and he was telling us that it's still a lot of things are up in the air. I mean, they're supplying so many of these components, even they are not very clear about which ones are coming under the new tariff line at 25%. So it is fairly uncertain. Now, let's talk about, and we don't know, let's see, the parleys between India and the US are still ongoing in terms of that trade agreement. And we had put out a source-based story yesterday that some of the items like medical and scientific equipment, cruise ships, aircraft, turbojet engines, maybe will relent on these items to protect certain other categories. So let's see. But what does the math say right now, the models that you've already sort of arrived at? For India, that blended tariff rate or the weighted average tariff rate, to what extent could it go up by? That's part A of my question. And part B is that since we are still not a fully export-oriented economy, what is the implication on GDP growth? How many basis points?
See, this is why, while I'm sure you and your viewers would like certainty on a particular number. So suppose we say that if there were true reciprocal tariffs, the impact would be about $4 to $5 billion, or if say it was $8 billion, so it's like 0.1 to 0.2% of GDP. But is that the right number? I mean, is that the real impact on GDP? Because over a period of time, of course, there will be negotiations. Not all of it will be borne by the supplier. Some of it will be borne by, and it'll vary from. So suppose you are a pharma company, and there is a very concentrated pool of buyers, but the cost of production in the US is 80% higher. So there's no way that they can really replace you with someone else. In which case, you actually have some bargaining power. If you are an auto component maker, and what price increases can happen. So these things will settle over a period of time. you also have other alternatives. You can actually reroute it through some other channel. And therefore, the impact could be actually far lower than that. So in fact, in India, for India, given that exports to the US are, less than 2% of GDP, whatever be the impact, so if 2.5 goes to 10, it's 7.5% of 2%. Frankly, that's not what I would worry about the most. I know it will affect a certain set of companies a lot. What I'm much more worried about is how uncertain this makes things for the world, and therefore what happens to global markets and what happens to the global economy. And therefore, the channel through which I think this uncertainty will affect us will be the financial markets and not as much the trade. To give you perspective, if, say, corporate capex as a percentage of GDP globally is, say, 8 to 10%, it's higher in India, it's higher in China, but globally it should be about 8 to 10%. And if 10% of those companies, 10-12% of those companies or of those investments get postponed by 6 to 12 months because of the uncertainties that we're talking about, we're talking about a 1% of GDP growth globally getting shaved off. It will show up over 12 months, but that's a substantial reduction. And imagine the second, third order effects of that. And then what that does to equity risk premiums, the uncertainty, and therefore, while for India, it makes good headlines, and I think it is very important. I think it's a great opportunity for India and the US trade channels to open up. It's a very large market. There are significant opportunities on the side of apparel and several other markets. But when it comes to the impact on the overall economy, or in particular our markets, I think that markets will be, far, far more impacted than the 0.1, 0.2% of GDP that may get affected because of these trade negotiations.
So just to understand this again, what you're saying is that expecting a 1% GDP impact, global, world GDP, that probably is a realistic number that we can work with, and therefore there could be a significant impact on financial markets, including ours, right?
That's the order of magnitude. See, I know we are all grappling with a lot of uncertainty, but remember that these are the first salvos being fired. Everyone is wanting to have a negotiation. Soon enough, as the implications start getting clearer. So, for argument's sake, suppose the Venezuela-related tariffs also take effect, and now there is 45% impact on Chinese exports to the US. What will happen to Chinese exports to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to India? And then how will our economies respond to this? Will we respond to this with currency, with non-tariff barriers? Will we then start raising tariffs, in particular on Chinese imports or imports from China? Remember that this is just the first salvo being fired in what is actually going to be a multi-year trade war. It is unwise to anchor yourself, this is how it will happen, and then, finally, then we are sorted out. Which is why I think we have to gear ourselves up for sustained period of uncertainty. And that is why I started off with the strategic objectives that I think the Trump administration is driving towards. Imagine that, even the auto component example. I was reading this article that now the US is saying that if the auto components in the imports from Mexico are US manufactured, there's nothing. It's almost like the popcorn on GST situation here, right? How are you? Imagine the complexity of the trade flows. It is, I think at this stage, it is reasonable to expect there will be a lot of uncertainty and not try to quantify everything immediately.
Neelkant, I'm being told we're short on time, as we always often are, but so many more questions. So I don't know if I can ask you to give me yes or no answers. That's absolutely unfair. So first question, Neelkant, you said the main channel through which this is going to affect is going to be markets, financial markets. You mean financial markets are in for a bit of a turmoil?
Yes.
Which means lower equity markets overall, broadly. There'll be tough for markets to do well.
Yeah, higher equity risk premium, and which means lower price to earnings multiple.
Okay. Is there a risk of overcompensating for all this? That we are maybe, because this is a 4-year, it's a 4-year presidency. So, as you said, post-World War consensus is being broken now. I mean, what if Democrats come back? So will we kind of completely revert now, or this is a permanent break? Or not? Tough to know.
No. It's like, you start a war when someone slaps the next person, and then they slap them back, and then the next person punches, and then you say, oh, now, or everyone behave. It's very
happen.
hard to... Well, one hopes that it will happen, because I think the previous world order, I think everyone behaving with certain common norms is actually not a bad thing. And eventually, even after the Smoot-Hawley and the breaking of the gold standard and all of that, finally some agreement came through in Bretton Woods, right? So it takes, I'm not saying it will take 10 years, but 4 years is a long time. Second, once you break things apart, even if you reset them, there will be new optimizations. And clearly there were some things that were wrong or that were not working in the previous order, which is why we are seeing this. So
this is happening.
It will be a different reset, but that's quite some time away. We all should be optimistic about the world, but
there is one view which is that if these reciprocal tariffs are implemented, everybody lowers tariff barriers. Actually, it could actually be good for trade, but who knows? There is one view as well.
I do think so.
Okay, my question, Neelkanth, sorry. My question is, do you think, given that in the world there will be more uncertainty, both on the fiscal and monetary side, we need to kind of focus on priming the economy here. Focusing more and more on the economy here to kind of be able to offset some of the global uncertainty.
Absolutely. That's a resounding yes. I think there is, the presentation titles that I use these days are turbulence globally, but drivers remain local. There is significant amount of local easing that we can do. There is significant amount of local demand that we rely on. And if we can get the liquidity conditions right, we can somehow get the credit growth back up and running. We can revive some of the slowing volumes on the real estate side. I think our economy should be able to withstand some of this global volatility a lot better than others. And then just to complete that argument, the question that you raised on that it can be good for India, I also think that the channel through which trade openness works is productivity. It is not in demand. This is the point that I keep repeating, that if for argument's sake, when we go from $4 trillion to $20 trillion over, say, whatever number of years, of the incremental 16 trillion, not more than 1 trillion will come from net exports. And the channel through which trade openness works is productivity. So if lower import duties improve our productivity, especially on some sectors which are mature enough and can now withstand openness, that may actually help us. And so there are economists saying that as well, and I think I agree with that view. Though we have to be very careful on what are strategically important, where our industry still needs some protection. I think, so anyways, this is what the government is doing. And from what I hear, I think they're doing quite an interesting and good job of the negotiation.
All right, Neelkanth, it calls for a much, much longer conversation, and we'll do that as well. But really appreciate your time here on CNBC TV18. Wonderful conversation, and I hope we are able to do these, once in a while and more frequently, especially after the 2nd of April. The first salvo, as you called it, is fired. Thank you very much once again.